Testing, testing. Okay. Yes, yes. Okay. So, I'm not going to waste any time. My name is Brian Dawson. Welcome to my YouTube channel where we discuss education, economy, entertainment, labor law, sex, religion, war, and counter war. And we love to talk about, or I love to talk about, the power dynamics in the United States as well as abroad. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about poverty in the United States. Um, Poverty is something that many Americans experience, and many Americans experience poverty, and it seems as though their stories are never told and no one sheds lights on their stories. So I'm here to do so. Um, so I would like to thank everyone in advance who will click on this live stream and who will later watch the live broadcast. I am going to try to do this live stream in about a 20 to 30-minute time frame. And so I'll begin. First, I like to start with a quote. And the quote is by Nelson Mandela, who says, "Poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man made and can be removed by the actions of human beings." So, a question that I would like to ask is, why does poverty exist? That's a question that many people will have is, why does poverty exist? We know that it exists, but the question is, why does poverty exist? Well, poverty exists because it is a condition that is created by human beings. Poverty is not an accident, is not necessarily a result that some people work hard and other people do not work hard. Poverty and social class has existed in the world for as long as we can go back in recorded history. So, for background and context of who I am, and also um, what I believe, well, I graduated college in 2016. I have a bachelor's of social science, and I like to study sociology and human behavior. Okay. And I am going to talk about poverty in the United States on this video. And I have a lot of interesting facts and information, and I hope to shed light on why this condition exists. So let's go back into how the United States was formed. So the United States was formed, making a generalization, because the New World was discovered. When the New World was discovered first by the Spanish and the conquistadors, they came to the United States, and then they began stealing the resources and bringing the resources that they took back to Spain, increasing the wealth of Spain. Later on in the game, the British got into the game, and then they started their imperialism in the United States. So the forefathers of the United States, they came from a government that was ruled by a monarchy. Um, if you know what a monarchy is a system of government where the king or the ruling class owns everything. The ruling class owns everything, and the people who are subjects own nothing. The only thing that they can own is what the king allows them to own. And as a result, um power is centralized and controlled by the ruling family. And in order to get anything, you had to either serve in the military or it had to be gifted to you by the king. Okay. Well, the founding fathers of America, of the United States, they left their nation and came here because they thought that was unjust, that it was unjust that the ruling class owned everything and they owned nothing. I am going to share my screen. And we're going to talk about the system of government that they created, which is called an allodial system. So, an allodial system is a system of land ownership in which land is held free and clear of any rent or service due to the government, commonly contrasted to the feudal system. Land is held under the allodial system in the United States. Okay, and this right here, the feudal system, is the system that they left, that the founding fathers left, and they came here to what's called the allodial system. Now, why am I using all of this fancy language and using these political terms? Well, one, understand that in order to get into the reason of why poverty exists in the United States. So let's see how many people in the United States are in poverty or close to poverty. First, we're going to go to Forbes and see how many Americans are close to being in poverty. To shock you, it says how many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. A 2023 survey conducted by payroll.org highlighted that 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, a 6% increase from the previous year. In other words, more than 3/4 of Americans struggle to save or invest after paying their monthly expenses. So that means that 3 out of every 4 Americans live paycheck to paycheck, which means that and this is a 6% increase from the previous year. So more than 3/4 of Americans struggle to save or invest after paying for their monthly expenses. So this means that 3 out of every 4 Americans, if they were to lose their job, that they would not be able to pay their bills. Now, it says certain generations struggle more than others. I wonder why. Because the young people are struggling in this country, as well as anyone who is elderly or sick. They are struggling. Now, if you're healthy and able to work, it's easy to point to someone else that you're doing better than, but we want to get to the root cause of why poverty exists in the United States. So certain generations struggle more than others when it comes to living paycheck to paycheck. For example, nearly half, 49% of baby boomers, now that they are elderly now, who are nearing retirement or already retirement, say they're living paycheck to paycheck. So the people who have worked the longest or invested in the system the longest, they are also living paycheck to paycheck. Okay. So in savings, it says that most Americans have less than $1,000 in their savings. Okay. Families with one child were most likely to report living paycheck to paycheck. So families with one child, that's a lot of people, that's 51%. Families with 2 children, that's 31%, are reported to be living paycheck to paycheck. 3, 46%, 4, 42%, 5, 27%. Statistic. Follow me here. So let's look at what the government about this. So they say that we are currently in affordable housing crisis. and it grows while efforts to increase supply fall short. Shortages of affordable housing are a long-standing challenge in the United States, meaning that it has always been this way. High interest rates and low inventory are contributing to this issue, as is the growing number of millennials who are looking for larger homes to raise families. For low income Americans, the hunt for affordable housing can be especially tough. So they already know that many Americans, three-fourths, as we just seen by Forbes, are living paycheck to paycheck. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, how are you going to afford to buy a house? Now, this is the people who are in the United States that's working every single day and oftentimes have high paying jobs, but they're still living paycheck to paycheck. Okay, let's look at how much Americans make per year. Let's look at how much Americans make per year. Okay. So right now, um, let's see what's going on. So this is about the poverty in the United States. So a quick snapshot is saying that according to 2022, that close to 12%, which is 37 million people, live in poverty. Neither the rate nor the number in poverty was significantly different from the year before. So that's close to 40 million people. And if we do the numbers about the three-fourths of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, that's almost the majority of Americans are actually living in poverty. Okay. So it says the share of population with resources below 50% of their poverty threshold was lower for the SPM than for the official poverty measure with a consistent universe. Okay, they love to use this coded language. People are poor. That's what we're getting at. People are struggling. So let's Google the average income in the United States. Follow me here. Okay, with a quick research, it says that in the United States, the average income, let's go by the most recent year, is $37,585. Now, I want to get back to the quote that says that poverty is a condition that is man-made, okay? And this has always existed. This is interesting. What percentage of Americans make $75,000 a year? It says only 12% of Americans make 75 to roughly $100,000 a year. So the majority of people are in this bracket where they're making about $40,000 a year and they're struggling. Now, let's look at real estate in the United States, because we're going to get into why people are homeless in a minute. But first, I want to touch some bases to give some context of what we're talking about. So this is in Dallas, Texas, right? A city that most Americans know about. So in Dallas, Texas, this is about the average cost of a home is anywhere between 300,000 to 500,000, right? Now, mind you, the average American right now is making about $37,000, which means that they would not be able to afford to live here. Okay, so for a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, almost 2,000 square foot house, they say the mortgage would be roughly $2,524. A person making $40,000 a year, they would not be able to afford this. Okay. Now, let's look at another city. Let's look at New York City. Let's look at New York City. And we're just going to go into renting for a second. we're going to go into Renton. So New York City. And we're going to get into why people let's look at Brooklyn, and let's look at rent. Okay. Now, okay. So we got 2K right here. We got 1.8K. We got 1.7K. So let's let's look here. Okay, so the average, let's look here. So okay. So this is on Hawthorne Street in Brooklyn, New York. They don't list square feet, but we know it's New York, so it can't be that big. So they're saying that the average person would have to pay $24,000 a year for a 1-bedroom studio to live here. Okay. Let's let's see what let's see what 3,000. Okay, so as we can see, the majority of apartments, those are the budgets apartments, studio apartments, and you could see when we changed it that this is the average price that most people are paying. They're paying 2,200, 2,400, 25, 3,000. So let's look at, and this is near Fort Greene, almost $3,000 for a studio apartment. This is outrageous. Okay. So that's about 36,000 a year for and to have an apartment in New York City. Let's look at Los Angeles. Okay. So in Los Angeles, let's look at this one. A, a 800, roughly 820 square foot home is, wow, and it doesn't even look that appealing, is almost $2,700 a month, right? Now let's go back to the average income. They say that the average income in the United States is around $37,585. So is how much per month? So that means that $38,000 is roughly $3,166.80. So okay. Now, in the two largest cities in the United States, as well as a moderate city like Dallas, the person would have to spend the majority of their income to afford housing in the United States. Okay. Now, let's go back to what type of government we're governed by. We're governed by an allodial system, a system of land ownership in which land is held free and clear of any rent or service due to the government, commonly contrasted to the feudal system, which means that the land is privately owned by individual citizens, right? So the question I want to ask is, why does poverty exist in the United States? Why does poverty exist in the United States? Now let's look at some things historically that has occurred in the United States, right? We have always had housing segregation in the United States, which means we have always had the haves and the have-nots, okay? It says redlining was a form of federal policy which segregated communities and concentrated disadvantage. The maps are the most comprehensive existing archives of data available tracing the historical legacy of residential segregation. Okay. It says right now, 8.2 million people live in neighborhoods identified by the federal government 80 years ago as hazardous and redlined since that time. Okay, the concentration of Black and Hispanic residents is redline areas is high. The average redline neighborhood is predominantly Black, 32%, and Hispanic, 30%. So if we say that's 62%, then that means that the remaining percentage is either poor whites and people that make up other demographics that they're not explicitly stating, right? So this is just Americans in general, but for Black and Hispanic people, it's going to be a little bit higher. It says greater levels of vacancy or abandonment in redline neighborhoods. Levels of housing vacancies are much higher in hazardous redline areas at nearly 10%, contrasted with only about 6% in areas of cities that were not graded by the federal government. This suggests that there are greater levels of abandonment in redline areas. Okay. Now, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And I just want to state that in a perfect world, everyone would have a home. I would like to state that in a perfect world, everyone would have a home. The reason that most people are going to struggle in this system is because in order for someone else to have, someone else must have not. I'm going to repeat. In order for someone to have riches, someone else must not have riches. That's the type of system we live in. We have the haves, those who have, and we have who? The have nots. Now, depending if you think it's fair or not, is which side of the fence you're on. So we have limited resources, right? And what's happening right now is that the average American only makes about $38,000 a year. So if they only make $38,000 a year, and the average rent in America right now is about $3,000, they can't afford it. So that's people who's struggling. And if you're struggling, it's a level of people that's below you that's struggling even worse. And who are those? Those are the people who are chronically unemployed, desperate, and the homeless. But we just read a stat that says that 3/4 of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So imagine for a second if you were to lose your job. Really go there with me for a second. Let's say you lose your job. If you lost your job right now, how long could you go before you would have to either seek another job or you would not be able to afford your mortgage, your rent, the place where you stay? If you lost your job today, that's easy. Just all you have to do is calculate your bills times a month. Do you have that much money in your bank account right now? And the reason that you probably don't have that much money in your bank account is because things are so expensive. So we're going to share the screen again. And we're going to go back into how much American per month. So it says, this is a frequently asked question to Google. How much? So $38,000 is $3,166 in a month. Okay. Now let's go back to rental properties. So this one is 2,650. This one would be half a person's income, which is about 1,795, right? Now let's go to another city. So this is Los Angeles. Let's go to Houston, Texas, right? So if we're in Houston, Texas, okay, let's drop this down. Let's say we only had $800, right? That we can afford, right? And let's say the max we're going to spend is $1,200. Now, these areas that we're about to look into in Houston, Texas, are going to be considered low income. Okay. So a person would spend a third of their income in order to live in a place like this. But we're not even going to delve into the crime. So in the South, you can find a place to stay, but you're going to spend even one third of your income just on housing. So if a person only makes $3,000 per month, they're still going to use nearly half of what they make just to have a place to stay. Okay, now let's look at homelessness in the United States. Okay, let's get to the facts. Okay, right now, this is not a good source. Right now in the United States, we have millions of people who need housing, right? We have millions of people who need housing. Let's say population, homeless population in the United States. So we have millions of people in the United States who need housing, but they can't afford the housing that they need. They cannot afford the housing that they need. They cannot afford the housing that they need. So it says right off the back, the United States struggles with a high level of poverty and homelessness. Now, the question I would ask is why? How could a person be homeless in the richest country in the world? How can a person experience homelessness in the richest country in the world? It's almost ironic. So, especially among the younger populations. In fact, 40% of the homeless population in the US are under the age of 18. The highest rates of unsheltered homeless youth occur in the western US states. Why? Because those states are more expensive. California accounts for one third of all unaccompanied homeless youth, with other states such as Washington, that's Seattle, Oregon, that's Portland, Nevada, that's Reno and Vegas, and Alaska. Now imagine being homeless in Alaska. That must be terrible. Also having large populations. The main cause of teen homelessness is physical and also emotional abuse from parents or guardians. Here's a closer look at the numbers. It says 46% report being physically abused, 38% reported being emotionally abused, and 17% being forced into unwanted sexual activity. Okay, now why am I talking about this? Because someone has to. Someone has to talk about the someone has to ask the question why why is this happening in the richest country in the world? Why is this taking place? You can't even really drive down the street in a major city without seeing homelessness, and we can't even rely on these numbers because these numbers might not even be accurate. So it says in California there's close to 200,000 people experiencing homelessness. Now go back to the figure I said before. If 3 out of 4 Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, the whole nation could enter a state of homelessness if the market crash. 25,000, almost 26,000 people in Florida. Let's find New York. So in New York, they're saying that there's roughly 75,000 homeless people. That's a lot of people. Even if those numbers are not totally correct, that's still a lot of people. Now the question I would ask is why? Why? Well, one of the reasons why is that we live in a system of land ownership in which land is held free and clear of any rent or service due to the government, commonly contrasted to the feudal system, which means that individuals own the land, they own properties. But it's not just individuals, it's corporations. So, what happens when the corporations take over the land? Well, when the corporations take over the land, then the individuals who don't have money suffer. Now, I'm sure you're looking at this video and say, "Well, you're not homeless, right? You look pretty decent. You look like you're living high off the hog." But what if I lost my job? I drive trucks for a living, right? And I get to visit some of these places. We're going to go to TikTok for a second. And I get to visit some of these places. And you know what I see? I see homelessness. I'm going to play you a video in a second. I see homelessness in the United States up close and personal in every city that I go to. It's a lot of homeless people struggling. There's a lot of homeless people struggling in this nation. Let's look at this for a second. People living like this on the street in the United States of America, in the richest country in the land. And my question is, how long can people go to ignore this? How can you ignore this? What if this was one of your children? How can we ignore it? In the richest country in the world, people sleeping in bags in the richest country in the world. Let me enjoy my coffee for a second. So, what can be done? Let's talk about solutions. Okay, we covered part of the problem. What can be done? What can be done to right these wrongs? Right? What can be done to right these wrongs? Look at this. What can be done to right these wrongs? This is someone's family member living outside. And if you lost your job today, how long would it take you before you ended up in a system like this? That's just a good question. How long would it take you before you living like this? How long? A month? 2 months? If you didn't have friends and families, how long would it take you before before you're on the streets of America like this? And we pass people like this all the time in the world. And there's people out there that's homeless for different reasons. We have people that's homeless due to mental health issues, systemic issues where they have been chronically unemployed. Now, the problem that I see when I see this is, how do we ignore this? How do we ignore this? What if this person or these people that's like this, what happens when it becomes so unavoidable? When so many people are living like this to where no one even wants to visit the city anymore. And I know this is not politically correct. A lot of people don't want to talk about this, right? About poverty in the United States, right? But my question is why? Well, the reason why is because in order for there to be rich people, wealthy people, and I'm not just talking about a couple 100,000. I'm talking about money that you can't even imagine, money that can't be spent in one lifetime. There has to be people like this. There has to be people like this. There has to be people like this in order for there to be rich people. And I wish that this problem didn't exist, that we didn't have children out there on the street, homeless. Let's look at people sleeping in there, people sleeping in our. There in the United States, people are sleeping in storage units. You can't make this up. You have people living in storage units in the United States, in the richest country in the world. My question is why? Someone has to talk about it, so it might as well be me. Wow. It's a storage facility. You have someone, their whole life is behind. They're looking for safety. They can't even afford to live. They're trying to live. They can't even live. Wow. This one says homeless, pregnant, now sleeping in the storage unit. Come on, man. Why? The question is why? Well, if you really search the answer of why, is because in order for this system to exist, some inhumane parts of it must exist. That this must be tolerated. Because in order for someone to have, someone else must have not. Wow. And this is being normalized, you guys. This is the part of the United States that a lot of people don't even want to recognize. They don't want to. Man, this is deep. And I just want to show this to you all because it's really deep to me. Is They have right now people sleeping in their cars, people living out of their cars, you guys. Look at this. This is the effects. And if you think it's bad now, give it 20 years. What about when your children grow up? What kind of world would they live in? Right? Look, this is a reality. This is how people are living right now. Man, sometimes we don't know how blessed we are, huh? They have people literally living in their cars. And the news is not talking about this. That's why the young people are on the internet talking about it. So she says safety. How can you be safe when you're not safe? Man. Now, I'm going to finish this video soon because I just wanted to touch on some of these issues that I see going on in the nation. My question to you all is, what do you think can be done to solve this problem? What do you do? People are sleeping in cars, people are experiencing homelessness right now. And my question to you all is, um what do you think can be done to to end homelessness in the United States, right? Um a lot of people are homeless, and it's just really crazy right now that so many people are homeless. So that's my video, you guys. You know, stay tuned. I have some more upcoming videos, but what's going on in the United States is just crazy right now. People can't even afford to live. So my question to you is, what do you think is going to be done and can be done to solve this serious issue that's going on in our country right now? Peace.